Callum Mercer slammed the door of his black Escalade shut, the sharp mountain air slicing through the tension in his chest like a blade. He dragged in a breath of pine and snow and finally allowed his shoulders to drop. For the first time in months, there were no meetings, no boardrooms, no shareholders breathing down his neck, just silence. And the lodge, the place was tucked deep into the Colorado mountains, rustic, quiet, completely off-grid, exactly what he needed. After selling off the European division of Mercer Holdings last week for over $200 million, he'd told his assistant to cancel everything. He didn't want a yacht in Monaco or a penthouse in Tokyo. He wanted to disappear, for 72 hours at least. He walked up the stone steps to the lodge, the crunch of snow under his boots the only sound. A fire glowed inside behind the frosted windows. It looked peaceful, something he hadn't felt in years. When he opened the door, the scent of cedar and cinnamon hit him. "Can I help you?" A voice came from the far end of the room. He turned, instinctively straightening a little. She stood behind the front desk in a worn flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, cheeks flushed from the fireplace heat. Her brown curls were pulled up in a messy bun, a pencil tucked behind one ear. There was something about her face open, real, no makeup, no pretense. She looked like she belonged here, like she was part of the mountain itself. "I'm Callum Mercer. I booked the weekend." Last minute, her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're the guy who paid for the entire north wing." He gave a half nod. "I needed space." Clearly. She grabbed a key off the hook. "I'm Zadie Lane. I own the place." He blinked. "You do." She walked around the desk and handed him the key. "Inherited it from my grandfather. Refused to sell even when some hotshot real estate developer tried to buy me out last spring." Callum's mouth twitched. "Sounds like a stubborn man." "Stubborn women are worse," she replied, brushing past him to grab a log from the basket near the fireplace. He followed her with his eyes as she stoked the flames. "You run this whole place on your own, most days. I've got help during peak season, but winter's quiet. Locals know to come up during snowstorms. Otherwise, it's just loners and broken hearts." He didn't answer. Maybe because that was too close to the truth, Zadie turned, leaning her shoulder against the fireplace. "You look more Wall Street than wilderness. What are you running from?" Callum raised a brow. "You always interrogate your guests, only the ones who show up with a custom cashmere coat and eyes like they haven't slept in a week." He couldn't help it. He laughed, a real one. It startled him. "Fair enough." She smiled but didn't push for more. Instead, she gestured toward the stairs. "North wing, second door on the left. There's a fire already going. If you need anything, I'm around." "Thanks, Zadie." He took the stairs two at a time, the warmth of the lodge settling into his bones. The room was simple but beautiful: exposed beams, stone fireplace, thick quilts, no TV, no Wi-Fi. Just quiet. He unpacked nothing. Just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the flames. The next morning, the snow was coming down in thick sheets. He padded down to the main room around 8, surprised to find Zadie in the kitchen, humming to herself as she poured batter onto a skillet. "You cook too?" "Only for people who look like they might pass out if they don't eat," she said, sliding a plate of pancakes toward him. He sat at the counter, watching her move around the kitchen with ease. "You always make pancakes for strangers. You paid enough for the wing. Might as well get breakfast out of it." He picked up his fork, took a bite, and closed his eyes. "Okay, that's ridiculous," she smiled. "Secret family recipe." They ate in silence, the kind that didn't feel awkward, just comfortable. After breakfast, he wandered outside with his coffee. The snow had stopped. The world was white and untouched, the trees heavy with powder. He stood there for a while, his breath fogging in the cold, and for once he didn't feel like he had to fix, sell, or manage anything. Later that day, he helped Zadie shovel the walk and stack firewood. He didn't know why. He'd never lifted a shovel in his life. But when she handed him one without asking, he didn't argue. She didn't treat him like he was made of glass or gold. She didn't care about his last name or his bank account. She just handed him a shovel and expected him to work. That night, they sat by the fireplace with mugs of hot cider. "You know," she said, curling her legs beneath her, "you're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone colder, ruder, maybe more buttocks." He laughed. "Sorry to disappoint." She looked at him for a second. You're not disappointing, just unexpected. There was something in her voice that made his chest tighten. He watched the firelight dance across her face, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. He'd built empires, closed billion-dollar deals, sat at tables with presidents. But none of that had ever made his heart beat the way it did when she looked at him like that. I wasn't planning on staying long, he said quietly. Zadie's eyes didn't leave his. You don't have to decide tonight. He didn't, but something told him he wouldn't want to leave at all. Callum hadn't meant to stay past the weekend. But by Sunday afternoon, the snow was piled nearly waist-high, and the roads had been closed off by the county. Zadie delivered the news like she was talking about a minor delay, her expression unreadable as she stood in the doorway with a steaming mug of tea in one hand. Well, she said, brushing a curl from her cheek, you've got two options. Help me dig out the generator shed or sit inside and wait for the plow crew to show up in 3 days. He didn't hesitate. Where's the shovel? By the time they reached the edge of the property, the wind had picked up again. The path was buried and the snow was wet and heavy. Zadie led the way, her boots crunching through the untouched layers as if she'd done it 100 times. Callum followed, more out of stubbornness than experience. He wasn't used to being out of his element, but he also wasn't used to someone like her. You always handle everything yourself, he asked, shifting the shovel to his other hand as they reached the small outbuilding. She knelt beside the latch, brushing snow from the lock. I tried hiring help once. Guy spent more time flirting than fixing things. I can't afford that kind of distraction. You think I'm a distraction? Zadie looked up at him, her breath fogging in the cold. I think you're not used to hearing no. He leaned against the side of the shed, the corner of his mouth twitching. I hear no. I just don't usually accept it. She didn't laugh. Instead, she stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. The generator's fine. I just needed to check it. But thanks for coming along. You tricked me. I prefer redirected. You looked like you needed something to do. Back inside, the lodge was warm again, and the storm had dulled to a quiet hush. Later that evening, Callum found himself in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, watching Zadie carefully pour a thick batter into a cast iron pan. What is that? Cornbread. Goes with the chili. You're making chili from scratch. She opened a cabinet, pulling down a jar of dried beans. You're not in a hotel, Mercer. He crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. You always cook like this, only when I want to eat well. He hesitated, then reached for a cutting board. What can I do? Zadie handed him a knife and a pile of bell peppers. Dice those. Not like a surgeon, though, like a person who eats food. As they worked, the conversation shifted. Why here? He asked quietly. This place, this life. She didn't answer right away. After my grandfather passed, I couldn't stand the idea of selling it. He built this lodge with his own hands. Every beam, every nail. You never wanted to leave. Sometimes, but I always came back. He sliced the peppers in silence, her words settling in his chest like stone. There was a steadiness in her, something unshakable. He'd spent years surrounded by people who measured everything in profit margins. She measured in loyalty. When the chili was simmering, they moved to the couch, bowls in hand. Outside, the snow had softened the world into silence. Inside, the fire cast a low amber glow. You're not what I expected either, he said, setting his bowl down. Let me guess, she replied, drawing her knees up beneath her. You thought I'd be some flannel-wearing hermit with 5 cats and a shotgun? I was thinking 1 cat. Maybe a weathered copy of Walden. She laughed then, a warm, unguarded sound that made something shift in him. I went to college in Boulder, she said after a moment. Tried the city thing, but I missed this, the air, the quiet. People underestimate how loud cities really are. I don't. He hadn't realized how much noise he'd been carrying until now. She turned to him, her expression softer. Why did you come here, really? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked into the fire. I sold part of my company last week. Biggest deal I've ever closed. Everyone celebrated. I felt nothing. Zadie didn't speak. She waited. I thought if I came here, maybe I'd remember what it's like to feel something. She didn't reach for him, didn't offer comfort. Just sat there, present and quiet and real. When he finally looked at her, she met his eyes without flinching. You're not broken, Callum, just tired. He didn't know why that undid him more than anything else had in months. By the time they finished eating, the storm had tapered off completely. Moonlight cut through the windows, silvering the floorboards. Zadie stood and stretched, her arms overhead. "Tomorrow I'll show you the ridge trail if you're still snowed in." He rose too, slower. "I hope I am." She paused at the stairs, one hand on the railing. "You're allowed to want peace, you know, even if you've spent your life chasing chaos." "I don't know what I want anymore." Zadie tilted her head, studying him. "Then stay long enough to figure it out." She disappeared up the stairs, leaving Callum standing there, heart pounding in the quiet. He wasn't used to wanting things he couldn't quantify, but he was beginning to realize that what he wanted now had nothing to do with stock options or mergers. It had everything to do with the woman who had just walked away. The ridge trail was steeper than Callum expected, but he didn't complain. Not when Zadie hiked ahead of him with the kind of focus that made it impossible to look away. Her boots left neat tracks in the compact snow, and she didn't glance back once, trusting he'd follow. They reached the overlook just before noon. The sky stretched wide and endless, the valley below glinting with sunlight on snow. He'd been in glass-walled boardrooms that looked out over entire cities, but nothing had ever stolen his breath the way this view did. Zadie crouched near the edge, brushing snow off a weathered wooden bench. "My grandfather built this, said this was the one place he could hear himself think." Callum sat beside her, the cold seeping into his jeans. "Do you come up here often?" "Only when I need to make a decision." He glanced at her. "Are you making one now?" "I haven't decided yet." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't press. Instead, they sat in silence, letting the air between them settle. Eventually, she stood. "You hungry?" Callum nodded. "Starving." They made their way back down in companionable quiet. When they reached the lodge, Zadie pulled 2 sandwiches from the fridge, already wrapped in parchment. "I made these this morning. Figured we'd need them." "How'd you know I'd come?" "I didn't, but I like to be prepared." They ate at the window, watching the sun melt the snow from the eaves. The weight of the city still tugged at Callum's shoulders, but here it didn't feel quite so heavy. After lunch, Zadie disappeared into the back office. Callum wandered the main room, eventually finding a shelf filled with books. Most were old spines cracked, pages yellowing. He pulled one down and flipped through it, surprised to find notes scribbled in the margins. A name was written on the inside cover in faded ink: George Lane. By late afternoon, a delivery truck wound its way up the drive, tires crunching through the slush. Zadie stepped outside, greeting the driver with a nod and a clipboard. Callum watched from the window as she signed for a few crates, then helped the man unload them onto the porch. When she came back in, her cheeks were red from the cold. "Supplies. I host a winter retreat every February. Artists, writers, people trying to reset. You run retreats. Twice a year, keeps the lights on." "You don't advertise that," she shrugged. "People find me when they need to." He opened one of the crates. Inside were canvas boards, acrylic paints, and a bundle of charcoal pencils. "You paint?" She hesitated. "I used to, haven't picked up a brush in a while." "Why'd you stop?" Zadie looked at the crate. "Because sometimes when you put something on paper, it becomes too real." Callum didn't ask what she meant. He just closed the lid and stood beside her. That evening, she lit candles around the main room, their soft glow flickering against the log walls. The power hadn't gone out, but she said she liked the quiet warmth they brought. As they sat across from each other, Zadie reached for a photo album tucked beneath the coffee table. She opened it to a page near the back. "This was the last retreat we held before my grandfather passed." Callum studied the photo. A group stood in front of the lodge, cheeks pink from the cold, arms slung over each other's shoulders. In the center was a man in a thick wool sweater, his eyes crinkled with laughter. "He looks like someone who told terrible jokes." "The worst," she said, smiling faintly, "but he believed in people. Even when they didn't believe in themselves." She turned the page, revealing a picture of herself, younger, standing with a paintbrush in her hand and a wide canvas behind her. A streak of green cut across the sky in bold, fearless strokes. "You were good," Callum said softly. "I was brave." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "What happened?" Zadie closed the album. "The world got louder. I stopped listening to myself." He didn't respond, but she didn't need him to. They sat in the hush of candlelight, the fire crackling low behind them. Later, as she stood to blow out the candles, he caught her wrist gently. "Come to New York," she froze. "What? I want you to see the world I come from, just for a few days. I'm not built for skyscrapers and cocktail hours. I'm not asking you to stay. I just want you to see it." She pulled her hand free slowly. "And what happens when I leave? I don't know." "Then you're asking me to fall without a net." He stood too, the space between them suddenly charged. "Maybe, but I've already fallen." Her breath caught, but she didn't answer. Instead, she turned and climbed the stairs, her footsteps slow and deliberate. Callum stood there long after she disappeared, the weight of his words settling heavy in the room. The next morning, she was gone. The note on the counter was short. "Had to check the South Trail before the weather turns. Back before noon." But noon came and went. By 2, Callum was pacing. By 3, he was in the truck, chains on the tires, heading down the trail she'd mentioned. He found her near the old footbridge, crouched beside a fallen tree, her jacket dusted with snow. She looked up as he approached, eyes wide with surprise. "I wasn't lost. I didn't say you were. I've done this trail 100 times, I know." "Then why are you here?" "Because I didn't want you to be alone." She stared at him, the wind lifting strands of her hair from beneath her hat. "I told you not to make this more than what it is." "I didn't." "Then what is it?" He stepped closer. "It's real. Whatever this is, it's real." Zadie didn't move. "I don't want to go back without you," he said quietly. The wind died. The trees stilled. And she whispered, "Then don't." Zadie didn't speak as they climbed back toward the lodge, her breath visible in the late afternoon air. The snow had packed down along the trail, making each step easier, but the silence between them had thickened into something that hummed just beneath the surface. Callum didn't mind. He wasn't chasing words anymore. He was learning how to move at her pace. By the time they stepped onto the porch, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows over the trees. Zadie pushed open the door and stepped inside, brushing snow from her sleeves. Callum followed, closing the door behind them. She turned to him, eyes steady. "You keep offering me pieces of your world. Why?" "Because I want you in it." Zadie studied him, her fingers curling around the edge of the counter. "You don't know what that would mean." "What I'd be giving up. I'm not asking you to give anything up. You think I can just leave and come back like nothing's changed. This place is more than just walls and fireplaces." "I know," he said, "but you're more than this place." She looked away, jaw tight. "When my grandfather died, people kept saying I could finally go live my life, as if staying here wasn't living, as if this wasn't enough." Callum stepped closer, voice low. "It's enough if it's what you want. But if it isn't, if there's even a part of you that wants more, you're allowed to want that too." Zadie's gaze met his, something fierce flickering in her expression. "And what if I come to New York and realize I never belonged there? Then you'll come home." She hesitated, her posture softening. "And you? What happens if you do belong here, but you're too afraid to admit it?" He ran a hand through his hair, the question cutting sharper than expected. "I've spent my whole life building things. Maybe it's time I figure out how to stay still." That night, neither of them spoke much. He helped her bring in firewood without being asked. She made tea without offering an explanation. They moved around each other like something unspoken had finally settled a decision neither of them had voiced out loud, but both understood. The next morning, the county plow came rumbling up the road, clearing the last stretch of snow between the lodge and the nearest town. Callum stood by the window, watching the truck disappear down the drive. Behind him, Zadie was packing a small duffel. She looked up, eyes cautious but clear. "I told my neighbor to watch the lodge for a few days." His chest tightened. "Are you sure?" "I'm not, but I want to find out." 2 days later, Zadie stood in the middle of Callum's penthouse, her boots still dusted with slush from the Manhattan sidewalk. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed a skyline that stretched into forever, and the city below pulsed with a kind of energy she hadn't felt in years. Callum set her bag down carefully. "It's loud. It's alive," she said. He studied her expression, watching her take it all in: the art on the walls, the marble countertops, the quiet opulence that came from decades of success. She didn't look overwhelmed. She looked grounded. Even here, he moved beside her. I know this isn't home. Zadie turned, her voice steady. Neither was the lodge. Not really. He reached for her hand, their fingers fitting together with quiet ease. The next few days blurred into something strange and beautiful. Zadie met his staff, walked through the Mercer Holdings headquarters with quiet observation, and listened as he outlined the impossible pace of his world. She didn't flinch when he got pulled into a crisis meeting or when cameras flashed outside a charity gala they attended together. She didn't try to tame the chaos of his life. She just moved inside it like someone who knew how to find stillness in the center of a storm. On the third night, they stood on the balcony, the city glittering beneath them. Zadie leaned on the railing, her hair whipping around her face. You ever think about selling it all? Callum looked out over the skyline. Sometimes, but I'm not sure who I'd be without it. You'd still be the man who came after me in a snowstorm. He turned to her, his chest tightening. I don't want to be without you. She didn't respond right away. Then slowly, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. What's that? The deed to the lodge, she said. I added your name to it. He stared at her, stunned. Why? Because I want to build something with you, not in New York, not in the mountains. With you? Callum's throat worked. You've seen my world, you know what it demands. I don't want to be another demand, I want to be the place you return to. He stepped forward, cupping her face in his hands. You already are. The kiss was quiet, certain. There was no hesitation now, no fear. Just two people who had stopped running. 6 months later, the lodge opened for its first full-season retreat in years with expanded cabins, a new art studio, and a private helipad tucked discreetly into the slope. Callum split his time between both worlds, flying in for meetings, then flying straight back to Zadie, who never stopped painting again, and every guest who stayed at the lodge knew something had changed. The woman who ran it smiled more. The man who showed up in tailored coats chopped wood like he meant it. And the fire in the main room never, ever went out. The spring air in the mountains carried a new kind of warmth, the kind that came not just from the sun, but from something deeper, something built quietly over time. The lodge was no longer just a quiet escape tucked away from the world. It had become a sanctuary alive with laughter, the rustle of sketchbooks opening on porches, and the clink of wine glasses by the fire after long days of creating. Zadie stood in front of the newly finished glass-paneled studio at the back of the property, her hands on her hips, eyes scanning the final details. The light streamed in through the massive windows, catching the edges of unfinished canvases and jars filled with brushes. It wasn't just a painting space, it was a promise of something lasting, something shared. You left the ladder out again, Callum said as he approached from behind, pulling off his leather gloves and tossing them onto a nearby bench. I was adjusting the beam, she said without turning. Don't worry, I didn't fall. You say that like it's supposed to reassure me. She finally looked over her shoulder at him. You worry too much. I've learned that when the woman I love climbs unstable furniture, I'm allowed to worry. She raised an eyebrow. You love me now, he stepped closer, looping his arms around her waist from behind. I've loved you since the day you accused me of being botoxed and soulless. Romantic, she murmured, resting her hands on his. I'm very consistent. She turned in his arms then, her expression gentler. You're also late. The first guests for the summer session arrive in less than an hour. We still need to get the welcome kits into the cabins. The welcome kits are already there, he said. I had them delivered this morning. Her lips parted. You remembered? I remember everything that matters. She brushed her fingers across the collar of his shirt. You've changed. He tilted his head slightly. You think so? I know so. You don't check your phone first thing in the morning anymore. You don't talk in percentages when you're stressed. I haven't had to talk in percentages since you made me run the lodge's accounting system by hand for a month. You deserved that, he grinned. I did. But I still think it was cruel. You were trying to hire a marketing team without asking me. I was trying to help. You were trying to rescue something that didn't need rescuing. He leaned in and pressed a kiss to her temple. I know that now. They stood in the quiet hum of the studio, the light shifting across the floor. No tension, no unspoken doubts, just certainty. Zadie pulled back slightly. "There's a guest on the list for this session, Claire Whitmore. She's a sculptor from Georgia. She lost her husband last year. I want to make sure she gets cabin 3. It's closest to the creek. She mentioned water helps her sleep." Callum nodded. "Already done," she blinked. "How did you?" "I read the intake forms." "Every single one." Zadie stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable crossing her face. Then quietly, "You really do see people now?" "I had a good teacher." Later that evening, the lodge came alive. Guests arrived in bursts of laughter and nervous excitement. Some carried canvases under their arms. Others brought journals or cameras or nothing but the hope that they'd rediscover some part of themselves. Zadie moved among them effortlessly, her presence grounding. Callum had once thought his power lay in his name, his money, his reach. Now he understood that influence meant nothing without purpose. And his purpose had become clearer with every day spent beside her. After dinner, they stood outside beneath the string lights that glowed between the trees. The stars were out, brilliant and scattered across the sky like paint on canvas. "You ever miss it?" she asked, her voice low. "The city, the rush, the power." "I still have the city," he said, "but I've never needed anything less than I need power." She looked up at him. "And what do you need now?" He took her hand, lifting it to his chest. "This, you, a place where things matter because they are real." Zadie stepped closer. "I never thought I'd love someone who lived in a penthouse. I never thought I'd love someone who sleeps with the windows open in the middle of winter." She smiled slowly. "You think this lasts?" "I think the things built slow and honest always do." That night they walked hand in hand back to the lodge. No rush, no destination, just steps in rhythm. 1 year later, the lodge hosted its first summer wedding. Guests sat beneath the trees in white linen chairs, the air thick with the scent of wildflowers. The ceremony was simple. No grand spectacle, just promises exchanged in the clearing behind the studio, with the creek murmuring nearby and the mountains standing witness. Zadie wore a dress that caught the breeze like it had been made from it. Her curls were pinned loosely, a small paintbrush tucked behind one ear, a quiet nod to where it all began. Callum wore no tie. Just a soft gray suit, and a look that said he'd stopped chasing the world because he'd already found it. As she reached him at the altar, he whispered, "You're the only thing I've ever built that made me whole." And she said, "You're the only thing I've ever chosen that didn't ask me to give anything up." The rings were slipped on with shaking fingers and steady hearts. The guests clapped, some cried, and the sky held steady. After the wedding, they danced barefoot under the lights. There was no first dance song, just the sound of laughter, the rustle of fabric, and the occasional clink of a glass raised in joy. When the last guest left and the stars returned, Callum carried her across the threshold of the lodge, not because tradition said so, but because he wanted to remember the weight of that moment for the rest of his life. And in the quiet that followed, with her curled against him beneath the old beams and the fire casting soft shapes on the wall, Zadie whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." He kissed her shoulder. "Neither am I," and they fell asleep, not in two worlds, but in one they'd made together. One that grew stronger with every morning light and every night that ended with their hands still clasped beneath the covers. Forever wasn't something they rushed into. It was something they built quietly, lovingly, and always, always side by side.